Hi, I'm Femi OK. Welcome to the final episode in the Stream's Climate Emergency Week. We're going to start this episode by going back 30 years.
In 1988, the UN established the climate change organization IPCC, where scientists from the whole world agreed with James Hansen. And world leaders listened.
Those who think we're powerless to do anything about this greenhouse effect are forgetting about the White House effect.
The evidence is there. The damage is being done. We can't just do nothing.
This is more than 30 years ago. Apparently, the world was ready to act on global warming.
So what took us so long to take the climate crisis seriously? Well, one of the big reasons is because of climate change deniers, misinformation and disinformation. That is our show today. I would love you to take part in it. If you're on YouTube, you can do so by jumping into the comments section. You will want to talk to our guests. They have a journalist who's been covering the climate crisis and climate change for over 30 years. We have another journalist who is an expert at debunking misinformation. She will literally be showing and telling us how she does it. Stay tuned. Now that I've hyped them up, hello Mark, hello Shauna, so good to have you here on the stream. Mark, will you introduce yourself to the stream audience?
Hi, I'm Mark Hertzgaard, everybody. I am the Executive Director of Covering Climate Now. That's a consortium of hundreds of news outlets around the world, including, I'm happy to say, Al Jazeera English. And we are dedicated to improving coverage of the climate story. And as Femi said, I've been covering climate change for 30 years now for various print and broadcast outlets, including The Nation magazine, where I'm the current environment editor.
So good to have you, Mark. Hello, Shauna. Welcome to the stream. You tell everybody who you are, what you do.
Hey, Femi. I'm a journalist focusing on mis and disinformation and trying to find out how best to combat things that go viral that simply aren't true.
I want to start, Mark and Shauna, with a comment from Alyssa Wyman. And Alyssa really takes us back to what is the problem with climate crisis and why we're not better at addressing it. Here she is.
For over 50 years, big polluters have used Big Tobacco's playbook to spread misinformation and exploit BIPOC communities globally in order to continue their deadly businesses, deceive people, and basically bury the truth. Industry misinformation and this PR is a massive barrier to building the political will needed to enact real and just climate solutions. These corporations basically spread this misinformation themselves or use their front groups to try and protect their brand and convince people that they're these good corporate citizens when we all know that they're anything but.
Mark, talk to us about the scam.
Yeah, the viewer has it exactly right, and she is saying what has subsequently been confirmed by some excellent investigative reporting that began appearing about 5 years ago now from the Los Angeles Times in particular, but also Inside Climate News and the Columbia Journalism School, that essentially can be summarized in the hashtag Exxon knew. These investigative journalists went back into Exxon's archives and were able to document with Exxon's own records that Exxon's top scientists by 1982 were telling the top executives at ExxonMobil that our product is going to burn the planet. They didn't use exactly that term, but they did say that it could cause the planet to become uninhabitable if it continued this way. And so we know for a fact that for almost 30 years now, the very top people inside of ExxonMobil, and subsequent investigations showed that this has also happened at Chevron and Shell and most of the oil companies. They knew exactly what they were doing. And instead of leveling with the American public and with policymakers, and I dare say with us in the press, they decided to lie about it to maintain their profit margins. And as I say, this is no longer just simply an accusation that's made by activists. Investigative journalism has now shown this conclusively. And you can find that if you just look up Exxon Knew, you'll find all the documents there.
I'm just looking here, Mark, at a story that you did January 2010 for Vanity Fair, While Washington Slept. Tell us about that story and the impact it had.
Yeah, it's funny that's dated 2010. They must have updated it because that story actually first ran in 2006. So that's 15 years ago. And that was the first piece where a journalist, myself in this case, was able to document that the so-called tobacco connection. And in fact, the caller mentioned this, that essentially the oil companies used the same playbook that the tobacco companies used to lie about cigarette smoking causing cancer. And not just the same playbook, they literally used the very same scientist, a man named Frederick Seitz, who at that time was the president of Rockefeller University. And Professor Seitz, Dr. Seitz, I should say, he was the conduit for some $45 million in tobacco industry funding that was given to various scientists to look at every other possible explanation for why there might be lung cancer except for smoking cigarettes. And this was very much in keeping with a now infamous line in public relations history where the public relations companies for the tobacco firms wrote in an internal secret memo that from now on, quote, doubt is our product, unquote. In other words, we're no longer selling cigarettes. We're no longer marketing Camel or smoke Marlboro rather than a Kent. Now we are marketing the concept of doubt to tell the public, to tell policymakers, and especially government regulators, the science isn't so clear about whether smoking causes cancer. Well, does this sound familiar, folks? This is exactly what the oil industry has been doing since 1991. You showed those clips, Femi, of former President Bush and former Prime Minister Thatcher saying this in 1990. They were ready to go. Yeah. And that's exactly when the oil industry began their disinformation, modeled exactly on what the tobacco companies had done earlier.
And Mark, when I'm listening to that and when I'm looking at social media, you'll have seen this too. There's such a spectrum of mis and disinformation out there, and it's become so broad. The one thing that I would say as well is in terms of what we've seen over the past year is that disinformation and conspiracy theories, the real world impact of those just can't be understated. And the intersection between disinformation, conspiracy theories that are often not in neat little boxes. That's why I want to bring you to this graphic that was created by a girl called Abby Richards. She's a fantastic researcher. And it shows how conspiracy theories, disinformation, they intertwine. Global warming hoax, we probably all heard about that, the disinformation around that and conspiracy theories around that. They can really easily intertwine with COVID conspiracy theories. And this graphic, the reason why I think it's great, it shows the impact of it, and it shows how easy you can move from one dangerous conspiracy theory to another. And as you go to the top of that triangle there, you move into conspiracy theories that are deeply rooted in things like anti-Semitism, conspiracy theories we've probably all seen before. So what I would say is when I look at stuff online and when you and I look at stuff online, it's so important to realize that there's many messages that people are trying to push out there that can be really dangerous that you mightn't be able to pick up straight away. For example, when we think of white supremacy, many white supremacists do actually also believe in climate change, but they want to push out that very dangerous message that, for example, refugees are causing the climate crisis, which is just not true. And so the messaging that you have online, be that disinformation or conspiracy theories, knowing that dangerous messages can be pushed forward via social media, that's really crucial.
Mark, I want to play you Michael Koo. He is a consultant for Friends of the Earth. And so we already know that there was a big lie about climate change actually happening, that it was happening, that wasn't a debate. The scientists pretty much agreed on the science. But why does the climate lie continue? This is where Michael picks up. Have a listen.
This network of deniers has been funded by the fossil fuel industry. It includes politicians, conservative influencers, pseudoscientists, and conspiracy theorists. What do they gain? The ability to keep selling oil by stopping any action on climate change while profiting off the backs of frontline communities.
Mark, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, that's what the data shows. That's what our investigative reporting shows, that this has been a clear strategy. And I would just say to viewers, don't let yourself be fooled. That's what they're trying to do. And it I think, bespeaks a real contempt on the part of the oil companies for all of our intelligence. They think that they can get away with this, even though they've been busted on it by this investigative reporting, even though it's out there and we know it's the case. They are still trying to fool you today, including with these ads now around Earth Day, where I think it was Shell who has an ad saying, "What are you willing to do to reduce emissions?" Right? And putting the idea out there that it's individual lifestyles that are really at fault here. And if only you will recycle, that we can solve all this. Well, in fact, folks, the real problem is there in the boardrooms. What we need to recycle are those board members, and to get people in there who believe that the health and future of humanity matters more than their short-term profit margins. And unfortunately, I would simply add, and Shauna, I'd be interested in your views on this, that, as bad as social media is, it is also greatly amplified by the fact that, especially here in the United States, there is an entire right-wing media infrastructure, starting with Fox News. I hate to say Fox News because they have nothing to do with news, but Fox and the whole right-wing radio world that regurgitates all of this, and thereby gives it a certain validity in the minds rather of audiences.
Shauna, go ahead.
I think that's been something that's really been documented for a long time. And when I was looking at posts that were performing very highly on Facebook, for example, using a tool called CrowdTangle, one of those posts was trying to undermine the severity of climate change, and that came from a right-wing conservative think tank. And so right-wing media does have the ability to amplify not only climate denial, I think, but also the shifting of blame away from, for example, these companies towards other things that can just shift the blame in a way that simply just isn't true. I think, Mark, you can probably have seen that an awful lot, the shifting of blame, not only on social media, but also through these right-wing media outlets as well.
Let me just go to YouTube, Mark and Shauna, because I want to throw a couple of questions at you. And if you can come back with some brief answers, that would be great. So Brian Wangi asks Mark, how long do we have before we reach a point of no return?
Look, it's already a point of no return for the millions of people who have died from this already. The air pollution that is caused by fossil fuel burning is not just overheating the planet, it is also destroying the lungs of people around the world. Roughly 8 million people die every year from that air pollution. So for them, it's already a tipping point past too late. Right. Now, in terms of the science, every day matters. And that's why today on Earth Day, everybody needs to rededicate themselves to really getting the climate emergency under control as quickly as possible.
Shauna, so what I'm also seeing on YouTube are some conversations that are not accurate. It's misinformation, it's disinformation, so I'm not going to reshare them. But Lee, thank you for your thoughts, and a couple of others, thank you for your thoughts. They're not correct. But what I wanted to ask you, Shauna, and then maybe you can help us out with, how do mistaken ideas about climate change or global warming, how do they get started? How do they go viral?
The thing about social media is that it has the ability to spread information extremely rapidly, and that information often isn't true. So I want to show you just a couple of things that I've spotted previously. I'm going to show you onto my laptop now. Examples of when climate misinformation went viral. This example in particular is in relation to the wildfires that occurred along the west coast of the United States back in 2020. The reason why I think this example is so important for you and I to think about is because it was really emotive and easy for people to push the share button on. It was one of the most viral posts related to this extreme weather event. And it claimed wrongly, without any evidence, and it was simply not true, that the group Antifa was behind the wildfires. And it used this photo claiming that this was a Marine that was trying to set fire to a car and trying to save people from Antifa. This actually was a well-shared meme previously, dated back years and years before that. What you could do is to find where this photo originally came from on the internet using stuff like reverse search. Anyone could have done that or try to find out more about it, but it went viral so fast, and it sowed a particular agenda. And the reason why these things are really important to remember is because it pushes forward false information at a time of crisis. And that kind of information, the shifting of blame away from, for example, climate change towards groups like Antifa, it's pushing towards an ideological or political line. This is just another example of a political candidate who shared that same messaging. People also take things just out of context, and you don't need high-tech stuff to do that. For example, the map here at the bottom left corner, it was trying to suggest that the wildfires were only centered around a particular area in the West Coast, claiming, for example, that there were no other wildfires happening. Of course, that wasn't true. At the right here, you can see how many wildfires were happening around the world at that particular time back in September 2020. Now, stuff like this, it does have impacts. For example, the emergency services were telling people to stop contacting them, saying that Antifa was behind these wildfires because it was taking away real and valuable resources. So the trend that I've been seeing, and Mark, I'd be interested to hear your view on this, is when we have extreme weather events, there's been not a denial per se across the board of a shifting of blame, but often putting the blame in a wrong place. Or, for example, in Texas, we saw people saying that it was the wind turbines that were shutting down, and that just wasn't true. And people sharing that strongly, often along political lines or often out of a place of emotion.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That happens and has been happening for many years. I'm speaking to you here today from my home in California. And, just last year during the terrible fires that we had, President Trump came here and met with Governor Newsom and his aides and said that the scientists don't know whether climate change is real. The scientists don't know whether these fires are connected to climate change. And that's just 100% incorrect. But again, when you have a very high-level official like that saying something that is utterly wrong, it gives further ammunition to these sources. And, I think most of them are bots, frankly. They're not even real people who are putting out this disinformation. It's just algorithms that are responding immediately to spread falsehoods. And it's not hard to understand who's benefiting from this. It's not just the oil companies. It's also petrostates like Russia.
I am going to share with you guests some of the suggestions from our community about what do you do about this? We're not even in the climate crisis, climate emergency right now. How do you battle the climate deniers who are still out there, the misinformation that is still being shared? They had some ideas, and then I'm going to present a truth sandwich. Mark is going to tell us what that is. Have a look, have a listen.
A number of solutions have been proposed for how to stop or slow the spread of climate misinformation. None of these are perfect. They all have their caveats and criticisms. The first approach is educational, and that would be teaching people critical thinking techniques and also better education about climate change. Then there's inoculation.
Researchers have found that when you expose people to a weakened form of misinformation, it builds up their immunity, their resilience, so that they're less likely to be misled when they encounter the actual misinformation. The other benefit of this approach is it means that when you inoculate people against climate misinformation, that also gives them the ability to spot those same rhetorical techniques in other areas like vaccination misinformation or COVID misinformation.
At AI for Good, we're a community of data science volunteers who are working on natural language processing algorithms to classify news articles online as misinformation, disinformation, or truth.
Mark, plenty of ideas there. Plenty of people being very active about what we can do. Covering climate now is one of the ways that journalists can say, how do we do this better? I just want to show our audience a statement here by the partners of Covering Climate Now. It's time for journalism to recognise that the climate emergency is here. This is a statement of science, not politics. Mark, how are we doing as a media globally handling this topic?
I think that we are getting slowly better. We founded Covering Climate now 2 years ago at a time of climate silence, especially here in the United States, and most especially among the TV networks that are still the dominant source of information for most people. We've broken the climate silence. I think we'll never go back to climate silence, but we have a long ways to go before we really, as an industry, as a news business, do justice to this story. Climate change is the defining story of our time. And Femi, the reason that we issued that statement about the climate emergency is precisely because that's what the scientists are telling us. It's not activism to say it's a climate emergency. That is the phrase science is using because, like with a heart attack, you need to respond to an emergency immediately, not tomorrow, not next week, immediately. And that is not, I'm sad to say, that is not how most news outlets are covering this story, at least not yet.
Shauna, social media platforms have been trying in the last year, 2 years, to try and tackle misinformation and disinformation, basically because of COVID-19, and then also during the US elections and actually during other big elections around the world. How are they doing with the climate crisis? What are they doing?
So platforms like Facebook have made gains or at least trying to tackle it more. Facebook, for example, they've released their Climate Change Center, which aims to provide people with legitimate information, trying to put the facts first. And I think that's a really good step because putting the facts first and how you tackle false information is very important. And what that will do is, and what they're trying to roll out even more, is putting labels underneath posts that are talking about climate change and then gearing them towards this new website that is all legitimate scientific information. But it's not just Facebook. And I want to show just another example here, because this particular app, it's very difficult to discern where fake news is spreading. And that's WhatsApp. Because it's closed, you can't actually see what's happening in WhatsApp. They're messages. You probably have, like I have, some relatives who share messages really quickly, and many of those messages would have false information in it. So what WhatsApp did and have been doing is, if a message is spread really, really fast, so a big forwarding going on, they will try and slow that down. And the left corner there, you can see 2 arrows under the example, Roy Ronald being forwarded. That'll show you if something has been forwarded numerous times. Now, that was put under COVID-19, due to COVID-19, but it's trying to do that to stop the spread of all the false information out there. But there's one thing I want to show you as well, and that's why I'm going to just switch into this particular image to show you about TikTok. So TikTok is where many conspiracy theories tend to go viral. And I looked up the word climate just before the show. And what TikTok was trying to push me forward to were things like climate change is fake and conspiracy theories like climate control. So the tech companies really do have more to do, particularly this example. They shouldn't be gearing us towards these kind of false claims.
Mark, I'm just thinking, I'm looking at YouTube and there is a discussion and there's a debate about the climate crisis, about global warming. If you were curating our YouTube right now, what would you be saying? What would be a pithy line that you would set people straight so the debate is in the right place and not the wrong place?
Well, you mentioned earlier, Femi, the truth sandwich, the idea of a truth sandwich. We have to be careful with all this disinformation stuff. Of course, it's important to route it out of Facebook and TikTok and the others. But let's not forget that most people, the overwhelming majority of people, over 75% worldwide, understand that climate change is real, it's man-made, it's serious, and we need to do something about it. So one tactic is to not give the liars more power than they really have by giving them that attention. Don't pay attention to them. And when you talk about the disinformation, you put it in a truth sandwich. So you start with the truth. Right. The truth is that climate change is man-made and serious. The sandwich part is that there's a lot of deniers out there, including the oil companies, who are trying to tell you different. And then the final piece of bread is the statement that all the science in the world and all the scientific academies around the world, 99.9% of scientists agree that this is real.
Thank you so much. Mark, thank you, Shauna. Thank you for taking part in our Climate Emergency Week. See you next time.